Daniel, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How's it going?
You've been way ahead of the Jadon Sancho curve the whole time. I'm not going to, it would be rude as a journalist to ask a fellow journalist your sources. But who are your sources, Daniel? Who are they?
I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you or something like that. Is that what people say in these circumstances? I'm not sure. But I guess, because it's not my job to get stories and speculate particularly, it means that I only have to publish the ones that I'm certain about. So, I've been told through the course of the season that deal would happen provided United got in the Champions League, because the other two clubs who had shown significant interest were Liverpool and Real Madrid, neither of whom had the money or had Sancho as a priority. So once United got in the Champions League, I think because I imagine a lot of the deal had already been discussed, it should, in theory, not take long to actually do the deal. Although United generally do try and drag their feet, it doesn't look like this is going to happen here, because they know what the price of the player is and they've decided they want the player. And actually, I imagine that they see Jadon Sancho as someone quite crucial for them commercially as well. Because if you think back to the dog days of Wayne Rooney towards the end of his career, Rooney was obviously finished as an elite level player. But what would happen would be United would need a player to go and do something for their sponsors. And in those days, basically everyone wanted Rooney, because even though Rooney was finished as a footballer, if you think about the players that Van Gaal had and that Mourinho had, then there weren't very many stars until they signed Pogba. And then, whereas now, if you look at that team, there are a lot of them. So if you're whatever, Mr. Potato Head or Turkish Toilets or whatever it might be, if you were looking at United then, you would always ask for Rooney. Whereas now, you look at United and you think, well, we could have Marcus Rashford, we could have Jadon Sancho if he arrives, Mason Greenwood's going to be a superstar, Paul Pogba, Bruno Fernandes. There's just so many players, and the amount of money that the club is able to make commercially is significantly contingent on the kind of players that they have who are attractive to sponsors, who people want to be associated with. So I would imagine that Jadon Sancho definitely works for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer because he's a high-level player, but I expect it also works quite well for Ed Woodward.
Look, that's really interesting, and obviously that helps grease the wheels, because I was wondering if this was a significant departure from last summer, when we saw the opposite, where they were linked with a player, but it dragged on for ages and ages and ages and ages and ages, and eventually they did spend the whole amount of money that Harry Maguire would have cost them at the start of the transfer window, and I just wondered if this was a maturing of the back-end processes.
I think Borussia Dortmund saying it has to be done by now or it's not happening probably has a greater effect on that, because I think back to other times when that happened. It happened with Dimtar Berbatov. United spent the whole summer trying to buy him and trying to get him for less than what they've been told by Daniel Levy the price was, and ended up having to basically steal him from the airport in order to pay the same price. And what you end up with then is you end up sticking Berbatov into the team. He's not settled in Manchester, probably. I don't know if that was a problem for him, but the players weren't used to playing with him. And he was quite a different kind of player to the players that had been in that team previously. And it took time, and it never quite worked out with Berbatov, even though he was good, but he wasn't as good as people hoped he was going to be. And I'm sure it wasn't just because he didn't start brilliantly, but it does make a big difference, particularly with strikers and attackers, that it's not the same in every case. Andy Cole is one who took a long time to get going, but mainly the ones that have succeeded, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Ronaldo, Dwight York, turned it on pretty much from the beginning. And part of that is the ability to get used to playing with the players if you can. And I think that Sancho is a different kind of right winger to the one United have had, mainly because they haven't had one really, a proper one, since Nani left. And they've got settled now playing with Mason Greenwood on the right, and he's really a wide attacker. He's looking to get to goal as fast as he can. And Sancho is something different, and the players are going to need to make different runs for Sancho, because he likes to hang on to the ball a little bit longer than Greenwood, who is trying to get shot off more or less. And he's trickier than Greenwood, and he's more likely to go on the outside than Greenwood. And getting used to where you need to be takes time.
Daniel, what do a club like Manchester United look at in terms of commercial attractiveness in a player like Jadon Sancho, other than the fact that he's unbelievably good at football?
I think that is a big part of it, being unbelievably good at football. Because if you look at someone like Messi, who is unbelievably good at football, doesn't seem like a particularly interesting personality, I doubt he is wanting for sponsorship deals. I'm sure that is absolutely fine. So being good at football will always be the main thing. I think what you're also looking for, though, is competitive charisma. Players who play with swagger, who play with intensity, who are entertaining to watch and fun to watch. And I also think increasingly you want highlights reel players, because that is how people are starting to consume football, and definitely how younger people are starting to consume football. Not all of them, but there are plenty of people, and hundreds of thousands and probably millions of people, who will watch the best bits of a game rather than the entire game. So when you watch the best bits of a game, who is going to be active in those best bits? And Jadon Sancho is exactly that kind of player, because he's extremely skillful and he's a lot of fun to watch, and he plays with a lot of joy. And that is the kind of thing that people want as much of as possible. And so I think it's more like that. Same with Paul Pogba. He's great to watch when he's on form. He doesn't mess about with. What was I going to say? How would I phrase this with Paul Pogba? The things of which he is capable are stupendous, and because of that, you keep your eyes on him. And I think that even when he doesn't produce, there's always the prospect that he might. And I think that is the kind of thing that excites people.
OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We're talking with Daniel Harris about the situation at Manchester United and the signing of Jadon Sancho. Is spending this money on Jadon Sancho this early in the transfer window a sign that there is more business to be done, or is this the end of the business? I
doubt this is the end of the business. I'm not sure how much there will be done after that. I guess as a United supporter, I was hoping for 3 players. I felt like they were always going to sign Sancho, and now, assuming that happens, I'd be hoping for a centre back and a midfield player to play with Pogba and Fernandes. I would expect them to get a centre back. Whether they can stretch to a midfield player, I don't know. It might depend on sales. It's possible also that they might decide that they'd prefer to sign another striker than a midfield player. To me, that would be a mistake. I don't think Sancho will be it, but I don't think they'll be spending that sort of money on someone else. It probably depends a bit on who they sell to. So they've got Sanchez off the wage bill, which is good, but the deal that they thought they were doing with Roma for Smalling seems to have fallen through. Perhaps someone else will buy Smalling. Someone else should buy Smalling. Smalling's a good player. And I'm surprised that Roma haven't found the money, because when you have a player who's doing well for you, it seems silly to say, we don't want more of that, we'll try and find someone else. But I think that they will sign centre-back. I don't know if the stories about them talking to Gabriel are true. They seem to be quite well sourced, and there seem to be quite a lot of them. And United are looking for a left-sided centre-back, so I'd say there's a fair chance that's happening. I've been told that Upamecano was at the top of their list, but he signed for Leipzig, so they're not buying him. So I think that what will end up happening is whoever the centre-back is, it will be a punt, in a way that Eric Bailly was a punt and Victor Lindelof was a punt, because there are players who cost a kind of middling range of money, where you hope that the player will work, but you don't look too stupid if they don't. And I think part of the reason for that is just that if someone gave you unlimited amount of money to go and buy a centre-back, who would you buy? And you can't get Virgil van Dijk out of Liverpool. And after him, there aren't that many players who are obviously excellent, who you know will be good enough to play at the top level. It's just, I think one of the reasons why people get so carnally excited about Van Dijk is just aren't very many good centre-backs around at the moment. And so finding a centre-back, you're never quite sure, because it's not as much about obvious talent as playing in a lot of other positions, like Jadon Sancho. You look at him play, okay, I get it. You can see it, and he's done it in the German league, and it seems unlikely that English fullbacks are going to be so much better that they're going to stop him doing it in England. Whereas if you play centre-back, what the demands in England are slightly different, but also it takes time to mature as a centre-back. You tend not to see players in their teens, in their early 20s, being good enough to play centre-back at the top level. Even Rio Ferdinand, who is a natural defender and a natural footballer, he didn't get really good till he was sort of 23, 24. And that's what you need from a centre-back, and particularly if it's a centre-back who's getting used to playing a slightly higher standard of football. And so if you sign someone from Ligue 1, then they might be a good player, but ultimately the standard is not as high as it is in the Premier League. And although the standard's not uniformly high in the Premier League, the top 2 English clubs are amongst the best clubs in the world, if not the best clubs in the world. And every player in the English League, pretty much, every team in the English League has at least one player that can really hurt you, one player of proper class, and some have more. So the ability of someone to step up, and then the ability also of someone to cope with the pressure of playing every game when you're expected to win, and also to play games where you might not see very much of the ball, so you need to keep focused, is a different skill from commandeering regular rearguards where you're just chucking yourself in front of things. So I think that whichever centre-back it is will be some kind of speculation, and probably for not that much money, because there just isn't, there aren't very, which centre-back would you go and pay 80 million quid for?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is there any chance that Smalling comes back to the club and wins a position in the team?
Unlikely, I think, because once a decision has been made of that sort, it's unlikely that that decision will get changed. As it happens, I think Smalling is a better defender than Lindelof. He's certainly more physical and better in a rearguard. He's not as good on the ball as Lindelof, but Lindelof isn't so good on the ball that you say that is more important than being able to defend. I think that he probably matches Maguire better because he's got recovery pace, so he can be covered in a way that Maguire can't. I think that is probably one of the reasons United want a left-sided centre-back, because if United get a left-sided centre-back, then it means Maguire can play on the right. And it means that you will have, let's assume that the centre-back that they buy has that recovery pace. Then you've got Maguire on the other side. He's playing as a right centre-back. You've got Wan-Bissaka covering him, and he also has legs and pace. And at the moment, Maguire's playing on the left. So if someone gets in behind him, then Luke Shaw might have to cover. And Luke Shaw doesn't have the kind of recovery pace that Wan-Bissaka has. So I doubt it will be Smalling, but I absolutely think that Smalling is better than Lindelof.
Okay. Just to go back to the signing of Sancho, who's losing out, or how does this work? Is it actually no one loses out and they all play the same number of games, or is there now a first choice front three and Greenwood is back to being relief because he's still very young, and so you're not going to play him 60 games next season because it's too soon, too early for him?
No, I don't think it will be like that. I think that the team, I guess the likelihood is that Sancho will play most of the big games on the right. But otherwise, then you've got Martial and Greenwood competing to play centre forwards. And you've also got the Champions League. So in the UEFA Cup this season, United were able to basically change most of the players because the teams that you play in the groups of the UEFA are so crap that you would expect to beat them whatever happens. In Champions League, that's not going to happen. So you're playing weekend, midweek. And as Fergie always said, there's plenty of games to go around. So it'll get to some big games, and I guess some players will be disappointed, but I doubt that it will always be Sancho, Martial, Rashford in every big game because Greenwood's too good. And I kind of always assume that eventually Greenwood will be too good not to just play at centre forward the whole time, except Martial looks like he's made that last step where he's actually now a serious player. So what we saw at the end of the season was that United's front three and Bruno Fernandes were exhausted. And you need to make sure that doesn't happen. And the way you make sure that doesn't happen is by making changes, because Ole knew that he needed to win most of the post-lockdown games to get in the top four. And what he found was that when it came to it, he didn't trust almost anything that he had on the bench. So even when you've got Rashford blowing out his arse or just not playing particularly well, because he didn't play well in the last couple of games, Solskjaer didn't want to bring on Mata or Ighalo or Lingard, and with good reason. Whereas now you've always got, assuming everyone's fit, you've always got at least one change that will seriously give the opposition something different to think about. Because it's not just about having numbers, but it's about having different options. And so if you've got to spend 75 minutes facing Jadon Sancho, who's trying to go on the outside, and then for the last 15 or the last 20, you've got to face Mason Greenwood, that's going to ask you a very different question, and vice versa. Or if you bring Greenwood on up front instead of Martial, or with Martial, then all of a sudden there are two centre-forwards there. And it's often options that are the most important thing to take advantage of tired defenders, where suddenly they've got to do something different, but they've been defending the box for almost an hour and a half, and the minds are tired and the legs are tired, and you need that variety so that the opposition have to think about something different, they have to do something different. And they might not be capable. And you also need weight and numbers, which can also in the end make a difference, where there's just so many strikers on the on the pitch that when the ball goes in the box, there aren't enough defenders to pick them up, or no one knows who's meant to be picking up who. And that's also really important. So I had previously thought that I would sign a midfield player and a centre-back and then deal with someone signing a winger subsequent to that. But actually, I think that United are probably unlikely to win the league next season. So signing a player as good as Sancho, who will make a significant attacking difference, is probably the right move, actually.
Is the sense, Daniel, that everybody will be happy with that arrangement up front? Because it does seem that there have been positive sounds on that front, with Marcus Rashford at the start of the season just gone, being pretty happy to be shunted out to the left to get the best out of Martial through the middle. That does bode well for adding another player into that party.
Yeah, I think Rashford's found his position. I think Martial's found his position. And for that, players deserve credit because they've taken to it. But I think Solskjaer deserves a lot of credit as well, because what he did with Martial was he started to take away his excuses. Because the thing with Martial was he's an excellent finisher, but he didn't have the intensity or the inclination to get into positions to score enough goals, enough of the time. So he would kind of linger on the left wing and he would try and receive the ball standing still. And then if the ball came across from the other side or someone shot, he would most of the time not be chasing in at the back post. So what Solskjaer did was he put him in the middle because he's a good finisher, because he holds the ball up better than Rashford as well. And it's worked really well. Like, his collection of goals this season is remarkably good. And if he starts, and there's still improvements, because if he starts scoring a few more tap-ins, then you're talking about someone who won't score 20 goals, score 30 goals. And he looks now like an all-round striker, and he looks like he's making the right runs. Because even at the beginning, when Van Gaal signed him, he played up front for a lot of the first season. He didn't make a centre-forwards runs. He scored goals because he was really talented. But what he's doing now is his positioning is better, his hold-up play is better, the runs that he's making are better. And in fairness, the players around him are a whole lot better, and the team's a whole lot better, and the manager's better. So all of those other things are contributing as well. So I think that him and Rashford have both found their positions. And what we've seen with Rashford, particularly after lockdown, is that he perhaps spending a little bit too much time playing really wide. But I think that's partly because United are trying to get Greenwood as close to goal as possible, and they don't want a man on each touchline and someone in the middle, because you need a little bit of connectivity between the team. But what we're seeing from Rashford post-lockdown is he's a really excellent passer, and he's almost sometimes a second playmaker after Bruno. And then he's built a nice partnership with Luke Shaw, who's overlapping him and underlapping him. Basically, it's just starting to work like a team's meant to. And that's not something we've said about United for a while, and it feels almost strange to watch it, strange to say it. And there's still a lot of work to do before they get to the level that they need to be. But when a team starts to develop, you can see the partnerships developing in different areas of the pitch. You can see the patterns of play that look familiar. You can see the runs where the players know where the other players are going to be. And we are seeing all of that from United. The question now is, will the board back Ole to take them to the next level? And has Ole got what it takes to reach the next level? Because ultimately, the standards are high. You've got to be as good as Klopp and Guardiola. And if you're not as good as Klopp and Guardiola, then you can still be a really good manager. But in order to win the big pots, that's what's going to have to happen. And that's a very high standard indeed.
Yeah, if you're not as good as them, you need better players and a better collection of players coming through. And, there's no evidence that they have that just yet. So last question for you then. Is it more or less likely that they get Grealish and or somebody at that level where there's another 60 to, I don't know, maybe it's 50 to 70 million transfer now that this Sancho deal looks like it's on the verge of being done? So essentially, is Jack Grealish off the table at the moment?
I don't think he's necessarily off the table. I doubt they pay 80 million quid for him because he's a player. I mean, they do need another attacking midfield player, because if Bruno gets injured, then the midfield is basically, it'll be Matic, Pogba, and then McTominay or Fred, which is solid, but it's not as good at picking people apart. I think that the fact that they've now got Sancho is also, he's another playmaker, effectively. He's not a wide attacker like Greenwood or like, say, Mohamed Salah or Mane, who are mainly there to score goals, to come from wide and to get into the box, and that be harder to pick up that way. He will score goals, but he's also there to create goals and to play make. So they do have a bit more leeway in that area. I don't know, But I wouldn't be paying 80 million quid for Jack Grealish when I could have Donny van Beek for about half of that, because Van de Beek is a slightly different player to Grealish. Grealish ultimately is a playmaker and scorer. He's there. He's spent half the season playing on the left wing. I think he's excellent. I think he's got the right mentality to play for United, although he'll probably need to curtail some of his off-field indulgences. But I think that Van de Beek is more an all-round midfield player. Like, you wouldn't have to play him in attacking midfield. You could play him in some games. You could play him in front of the back four. In other games, you could play him slightly further forward. And that is more the kind of midfield player that I think United need, rather than someone who, like Grealish, who would ultimately, he's just an alternative to Bruno Fernandes. Although United do need one, I think they have other significant needs before that.
You'd also be paying the English tax, where it's an English qualified player signed for Manchester United.
And I mean, the advantage of signing someone like Grealish is you know that he can do it in the Premier League, because we've seen. And the thing for me with Grealish is the positions that he plays are not areas that I think are the most important for United. And that's not because I don't think United need another attacking midfield player, because we saw at the end of the season that they do. But as I said, they've kind of addressed that with Sancho, because he can take on some of the playmaking duties. And suddenly with Sancho, you look at United, and if you're in opposition, you think, who do we mark? Because when Bruno Fernandes signed and Pogba was injured, other teams could think, in theory, well, if you double up on Fernandes, if you stop Fernandes, you more or less stop United. And that isn't the case anymore. So I think that with Sancho as well, I definitely wouldn't go for Grealish before I went for a midfield player who could play deeper, and I went for a centre-back, and I'd probably sign a left-back. I definitely would at least think about signing a left-back before I sign Grealish as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Daniel Harris, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks a million.
See you again, lads. Have a good day.